Morning, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar on organisational resilience. I really appreciate all of you making the time to attend this workshop. I know many of you, like myself, have got kids. School has just started back in South Africa, so we're juggling a new schedule, trying to balance home and work with, again, seemingly less hours in the day. So I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to be here with us today. Just some housekeeping, if you could please keep your microphones on mute. There is a Q&A section on the side. If you do have any questions as we progress, please send them through. And then I've got a lovely team of ladies helping me doing the production today, so they'll send through your questions as we go along. My name is Nadine Rix. I'm the National Risk Officer for BDO in South Africa. And for those joining us for the first time, I'm just going to do a quick recap on what we spoke about in round one. So in our first webinar, we discussed what resilient organizations look like. We identified the characteristics of these organizations as having a sense of control. They're goal-orientated, not only goal-orientated themselves, but their employees feel empowered to achieve the goals that have been set out. We spoke of them having problem-solving skills and encouraging creativity whilst building strong connections. They're not afraid to ask help for those in their environment, and they have a survivor mentality, kind of like a silver lining, seeing the silver lining in the dark days, especially with what we're going through. We then explored what organizations can do to relieve the pressure from leaders in times of crisis, and of change. I think we're in a state of continuous change, and our leaders need to be able to think, adapt, communicate without having to micromanage every single aspect of the business. So this then led to the creation of the Organisational Resilience Framework, in which we define the three foundations needed to achieve these resilient characteristics. So if we then move on to the framework, it consists of three foundations, one being data, you'll see that in green on your screen, one is systems and processes, and then in red we have trust. So by applying this framework, organizations can start to create resilience and move away from let's call it an over-reliance or too much pressure on the leaders and the managers to show the way forward. Today, we'll be looking at how to apply this framework in the areas of strategy and leadership. Next week, we'll look at how to apply the framework for business development. And then the final session will deal with operations and risk in detail. So before I start with strategy and leadership, let's talk a little bit more about each of the foundational elements, the first one being data. So any of you that have recently done any sort of like internet research on data, it's full of it. Everyone is talking data, you have to have it, you have to be able to analyze it. And while I agree with it, I'm sure that many of you, like myself, have spent our fair share trying to consolidate Excel spreadsheets or data in an attempt to combine and clean up data sets that emanate from different sources. I'm oftentimes frustrated by this because formulas don't work, somebody decided to delete a line or a column somewhere, people complete the information using different formats, or the systems saving the data, they're not compatible. So how many of us have sat in meetings where, for example, HR will come forward and they will report on, let's say, the number of employees that have taken leave. So they do their presentation, and as each of the business units comes and presents on that same number, we realize, but hang on, it doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. Or finance will come and do a divisional revenue reporting, yet when that division gets up, their numbers look different. Now, this can all be very, very frustrating, and it all has to do on the integrity of the data and how it's being reported. Some reports include numbers that others don't. Categorization of data could be different, and sometimes the method of calculation have changed from one month to the next. And this results in discrepancies within the same data set. So while it's important to collect data, we need uniform reporting standards. Otherwise, the underlying data points that support our reporting models, it's not necessarily reliable. And here's the important thing. The insights gathered from data is only as good as the underlying data on which they're based. A significant portion of organizational data collected is either trivial, irrelevant, of no business value, can't be read by the systems in place. And extracting insights from the data is also constrained by inconsistent naming conventions. I'm sure some of you might have been asked to do a list of employees, and then sometimes it's the name first, then the surname, some has the middle name in between, which all takes a lot of time to then actually put together a proper report. There's duplicate data, there could be incomplete records. So after investigating a little bit on whether I was alone in this data jungle, I found research by Gartner indicating that poor data quality is estimated to cost organizations in the US an average of 15 million in losses a year. Some businesses in excess of that. Data workers are estimated to waste around 44% of their time each week on data preparation alone. And I think we can agree that that's time that could be much better spent doing analysis to yield insights. Streamlining the insight recovery process starts with getting your data house in order. We need to ensure that when we capture data, it's accurate, our cutoff dates are aligned, it complies to standard naming conventions, and as far as possible, human interaction needs to be limited. So when we move to strategy and the utilization of this framework, we'll see that the data you need to capture to inform your strategy is quite important. Next, we move on to systems and processes. So once our data house is in order, we see what systems and processes are in place to actually help us to analyze it. So systems and processes are the essential building blocks of each company. Each facet, from the shop floor to the warehouse or in the office, is part of a system that can be managed or improved upon by applying certain principles. The processes is all the activities inside your company that work together to, at the end of the day, provide organizational value. If we take a simple example, let's take a sales system. So it starts from receiving an order to order fulfillment, where you deliver the product or deliver the service. Now, throughout the system, there are different processes, such as checking to see if the product is available, booking a delivery slot, booking transporters, and all of this at the end of the day helps us then to enable us to give our clients value. The importance of systems and processes when we talk resilience is that they can help us to analyze data. We can use trend analysis to use data to tell us about what's going on in our market, what our customers are doing. We can build particular alerts into our systems to alert us of any regulatory changes or possible new risk events. Now, agreed that the world we live in today, we are inundated with research, and pretty much on a weekly basis, our external environment changes and fluctuates. So whilst all of this sounds very simplistic, oh, I just need the data, and then I need systems and processes, remember that all of these things are there to help us to make sense of the current environment that we're in. So I'm going to do this by, I'm going to show you a little illustration on how we can use systems to help us to make sense of data. So if you can maybe all look at the screen, you should see a blank screen at the moment. And in a few seconds, I'm going to show you a data set that includes numbers from 1 to 60. So random numbers from 1 to 60. I'm going to ask you to count sequentially. So when you see the data set coming on, I'm going to ask you to count sequentially from 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you need to find the numbers in this data set, and I need you to count as far as you can until I stop you. So if you can please start counting for me now. Right. I'm going to move to our Q&A session here, and I'm going to ask Londiwe if she can maybe just send me, you can type in onto the Q&A how far you got. So if you got to the number 3, just type in number 3. If you got to number 4, type in number 4, so that we can see more or less how far you guys got in terms of counting on that first data set. So I'm going to ask Londiwe, can you maybe share with me how far our attendees could get? I know the first time I did it, I got to about number 3, so not that great.
Hi Nadine, nothing has come through yet.
Nothing has come through yet. Okay, all right. So if you can Just send for me. There we go. We've got a couple here. Anonymous said he got to 5. We got 4. Right, so more or less I got to 3. So that's more or less where we got to on the first round. Now, what I'm going to do on the next round is I'm going to show you that same data set, and we're going to try and see if we put a process in place over this data, if we can maybe count a little bit further. So what I'm going to do, oh, thanks. Now all the answers are coming through. Thank you. Wow, bright bunch of attendees. Most of them got between 4 and 5. That's better than I did on round 1. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a system in place. You'll see the data again. It's exactly the same as the previous slide. But all I'm going to do now is I'm going to make your life a little bit easier by putting a little system in place to say I'm going to put a line through the middle, and all the numbers on the left-hand side are odd numbers, and all the numbers on the right-hand side are even numbers. So that's very simple. It's exactly the same data. We've put a little system in place, and it shows us that on the left is odd and on the right is even. Now, before you start counting, I'm going to count you down again. I'm going to give you the exact amount of time I gave you on the first round, and then we're going to see how you do. On your marks, get set, and go. Okay, so you can stop for me. Please input for me on the Q&A section again, how far you got on the second round. So if you can maybe just show for me the second round, you can, Londiwe will just publish it as we go along, how far you got on round 2. Okay, Londi, are they coming in? Excuse me.
Not yet. I see one has.
Here we go. 12, 13, 8. There we go. Right. So we can see that there's quite a vast improvement from the first time we did it to the second time. Sure, I'm glad that worked. Okay, so a lot of you will say, but oh, you know, I saw the data for the second time, so it was more familiar. Wow, one person got to 21. That's quite something. So yeah, so you can see vast improvement from the first time to the second time when you did it. Now you can say, yes, it's because I looked at it again, you know, it was easier to do it. And that's exactly what systems and processes do to data. We review it, we look at it again, we put a system in place to categorize it a little bit, and that helps us to make sense of this random bunch of numbers that we have. So that's a very, very simplistic example of how these two elements work together, from having data on the one side, which is chaotic and crazy and it's a lot and we don't know what it's all about, to move to a more informed way of looking at it. So all those facts that we've accumulated, they don't really qualify as information until they inform. So to use the data effectively, we need to make sense of it. Today, sense making is our primary task, to try and make sense of our environment, and systems and processes can help us to make sense of the data that we collect. So it's with that now that we move on to the last foundation for resilience, which is trust. So trust is a tricky thing to define, but we all know when it's not there. It's like oxygen, you only realize it's missing when you don't have it. Trust in our environment is absolutely critical. If people see us behaving in a manner that's not linked to our purpose, it could lead to mistrust and eventually disengagement. I can tell somebody that I'm honest, but if I keep lying, they'll start doubting me, they'll doubt my integrity, and eventually they'll start to disengage. And the same goes for organizations and teams. If we promote our companies to be truthful and transparent, but we don't share with our people what is happening, people will start mistrusting leaders, and soon you'll have a workforce working against you and not for you. Now, I do understand the balance between oversharing and being transparent, but this is where we need leaders who are really skilled at engagement and relationship management. I'm going to pause here quickly just to see if we've got any questions from our audience, because it's important that we understand these foundations before we can then apply them across strategy and leadership in the different areas of the business. I'm just going to quickly take a pause here. I'm going to check in with Londi if there are any questions that we need to answer at this point in time.
Hi, Nadine. No questions as yet.
No questions. Fantastic. All right. So now that we've gone through each of the elements and we understand how they work, I'm going to start by applying it over strategy and leadership. So when we look at strategy or when we talk strategy, it's important to distinguish between strategy and purpose. Oftentimes people get these two things mixed up. So if you're not yet familiar with the Simon Sinek Golden Circle, this book starts with why is fantastic. I do urge you to watch his TED Talks. If you can, buy the book and read it. It's fantastic. It's a game changer on how we lead our organizations. It takes organizational purpose and it puts it in the center. That's the reason the company exists. The purpose would rarely change over time. It's fairly fixed. And it's often linked to the beliefs and the values of the founders of that organization. So he puts this in the middle. He said that is the core, that is the critical part that we need to understand. From there, we then get to how we do it. This is the strategy, how we get from where we are to where we want to be. And then the last component is the what. This is the product or the service that we then deliver. Now, many organizations know what they do. In BDO's case, it's delivering accounting, tax advisory, and audit services. But a lot of organizations are not sure why they exist. And it's been proven over and over again, having our people, communities, suppliers, and customers see our why in how we do business on a consistent basis is guaranteed to ensure their loyalty and in times like this, their forgiveness. So we really need to focus on our why and make sure that that translates into how we do business and what we deliver. So let's look at strategy and how to build resilience into strategy. I always like using examples and case studies when we talk about things like that. So for today, I'm going to look at our little shop owner. It's called Local Yokel. Believe it or not, there is actually a company with this name. This is not affiliated to them whatsoever. I think they sell meat or something like that. I really like the name. And we're going to look at strategies through the eyes of Local Yokel. So let's see from their side, so the purpose and why they exist is to support and expand local businesses by bringing local goods into the homes of communities. Their beliefs are old-fashioned values of service, friendliness, and social connection. So that's why they exist. How they do this is they source from local farmers and homemakers, things like baked goods, arts and crafts, homemade in little things, and they bring this to easily accessible locations. They operate in about 50 locations, and for the sake of today, they are in Cape Town, as I'm in Cape Town. And what they do, very simply put, they sell products to customers through physical outlets. Right, so that's Local Yokel, that's why they exist, how they do it, and what they do. Now, let's take a look at how their strategy has been impacted in the last 6 months. In order to do this, I'm going to look at a very, very simple SWOT analysis. The reason I'm using a SWOT analysis is that although there are many factors that influence our strategy, the models for strategy design exist to simplify the complexities of everyday life. They're still as relevant as ever. When designing a strategy, they simply help us to understand where we are now, and they help us to get to where we want to be in a very systematic way. So if we think back to that muddled set of data numbers, these models help us to make sense of the data we have today. So questions that Local Yokel can ask, it's easier to facilitate that by applying model thinking. Are the factors that influence their strategic design still relevant? This means, are their strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunities pre-pandemic still relevant as they are today? So if we look at the strengths first, typically for retailers, a lot of them have in their strength analysis, they have brand reputation. So if this was a strength pre-pandemic, how has this been impacted in the last 6 months? Were they able to put products on the shelves? Have they considered that reputation is now more than ever linked to social impact and employee well-being? Did anybody get sick, customers or staff? And if so, how was this managed? How did people communicate to each other? Do they know how they are perceived versus their competitors? And are they collecting data to show how their brand and their reputation has been impacted by all of this. Second to reputation, a lot of companies mention workforce as a strength. So if a skilled workforce was a strength pre-pandemic, is this still the case? Are they protecting the physical health of employees, and are there mechanisms in place to make sure that emotional well-being is taken care of? Do they know how their workforce has been impacted? Do they know who is homeschooling, maybe taking care of elderly, and who might not be able to come to work? Do they know who are unable to work remotely and who is able to work remotely? Have they had to let people go, or can they redeploy them? Have they looked at maybe what skill sets there are within employees and use them to create this new strategy as they go forward? Again, are they collecting the relevant data to aid their decision making? Next one, when we look at retail, customer service is obviously, it's also a lot of times something people will mention as a strength. So if we look at how much they focused on customers having this good old-fashioned, fuzzy in the tummy vibe when you enter their stores, how has this been impacted by masks, sanitizers, and forced physical distancing? Customers might have been too scared to come into the shop, and in some areas they might have had to close down. So will they decide to make a move online? A heavy, if not all, reliance will have to be placed on data to help them to make this decision. So that's a little bit about their strengths. And again, this is just a case study. It doesn't relate to a specific entity at all for the purposes of this discussion. So weaknesses, maybe pre-pandemic, they saw geographical presence as a weakness. They're only in Cape Town, they only have 50 stores. So if they're considering a move online, is this still a relevant weakness? We can also assume that they would have been in a cash operating position, operating with small farmers and businesses. We can assume that they won't be able to get credit payment terms. But now in South Africa, interest rates have dropped quite significantly. So they might be in a position to go for short-term business loans. If they owned their premises, they can put up the stores as collateral for these loans. And if they decide to go online, they can even repurpose some of these assets to refinance the capital. And for all of this, again, they need data. So we have all of these internal influences when it comes to strategy, but there's also a lot of things that influence our external environment. And this is most likely where the opportunities and the threats lie, the things that are coming to us from the outside. And in the time that we're in, that is most likely where most companies are struggling with this constant change, every day that's coming. So questions in redesigning strategy comes down to the external forces that we can't control. How do we build resilience in our business models as these forces most likely will continue to change for quite some time to come? If we then look at some of these factors, and again, I take a very favorite strategic model to look at this, which is PESTEL. So political factors, we look at government influences such as trade and taxation. In South Africa, our president on Sunday night declared that there's a ban on alcohol sales again. So obviously anybody in the wine industry, our big beer makers, they were impacted overnight without anybody seeing it coming. Economic factors, these include interest rates, employment or unemployment rates, material costs and foreign exchange. Social factors focus on the social environment, and this includes changing family demographics, education levels and cultural. Technology, here we typically focus on innovation and development. There's a tendency to only focus on digital technology, but we can also look at things like distribution, manufacturing, and logistics. When we look at environmental factors, here we look at things like climate change, recycling, carbon footprint, waste disposal, and sustainability. And then we have the legal factors, which is the last one, and that includes things like employment legislation, consumer law, and health and safety. So if we just look at these elements, we can see how they've been impacted, and all of these things have played a part in the last 6 months, and all of them have impacted the business, which leads us to ask the question, do we know which of these areas have had the most impact on our business? Are we monitoring them going forward because they know they could potentially change? So do we have the data to tell us where we are? And are we monitoring these elements to see where the fluctuations are? Do we have systems in place to flag any changes that could map another impact on our organization, and not just our organization, our clients, our suppliers? We need to make sure that we keep an eye on all of these things all the time. So while we can agree that systems and processes must enable quick decision making and offer new ways of doing business, we can no longer delay on deploying the use of technology in all areas of business to ensure that our products and services, they have to remain relevant. So strategy execution is dependent on 5 elements, and there are countless uncertainties that will remain. So when we look at our cash that we need to execute our strategy, what are the government stimulus packages looking like? Are we monitoring them? Are we looking at them? Are we looking at our cash flow on a daily basis? We look at technology. We need that to enable us to do business going forward. So are we deploying them? Are we doing research? Are we checking on what our competition are doing? Our customers. So customer sentiments and needs keep changing. So in retail, maybe what Local Yocal could have found is, now that they move online, many people eat at home more often. So maybe they offer a product where, everything is packaged together. You get your meat and your spices and a nice little recipe book so that people can make restaurant style meals at home instead of just selling the ingredients. So how can they maintain that personal feel? Maybe they interview farmers to get that sense of community going, because customer needs are going to keep changing because their environment keep changing as well. So are we monitoring these shifts in there? And then the last one, which is people. Remote workforce is here to stay. Our knowledge on how to test, trace and treat this pandemic changes every day. And the regulations and the legislative changes are going to keep impacting our operations. So we need to be able to determine how these influences have affected our ability to execute our strategy. Now, you can see from this that strategy used to be something we revisit, every 3 to 6 months, if that. Strategy decisions and our leadership needs to be meeting on a much more regular basis, even on a weekly basis, to make sure that whatever path we've chosen, if we need to adjust it, we can do that quickly and swiftly. It's no longer something we can just kind of revisit every 6 months, or some people even every year or 3 years. So if we go back to our friend Local Yocal and we say, okay, he's now decided to move online. He's done the research, he's looked at everything, he's taken into account his target market, his purpose remains the same. So to enable him to keep his reputation going the same way he did before, he might have the objectives, but his action plan is going to look a little bit different. So he wants his customers to feel safe and to feel at home. So he's going to have to invest a lot in kind of like, the little shops, if he decides to keep some open, that the health and safety regulations are being taken care of. And if he goes online, he needs to make sure that they feel like they're valued and their online presence is valued. Ensuring staff well-being is top priority. Without a doubt, that's the thing everybody's talking about. He might want to expand his service offering. Again, he's focused on the community, he's focused on community reputation. So maybe talk to the farmers and see some of their staff or some of his own staff, if they can create their own little delivery network instead of relying on an external delivery network. I know a lot of the restaurants in our area where I live, they kind of say we don't want to use the local delivery suppliers and runarounds. We want to train our waiters and our staff to actually make sure that they keep their jobs. And this has been very, very positively received in the communities. The communities are saying, yes, please use your own staff. We'll wait for you to get up to speed so that we can maintain those jobs, which is great. So then also, if he operates in these different areas, to make sure that everybody has accessibility to the online platforms. He might want to partner with somebody to have a mobile money transfer capabilities built into what he's doing. That way people don't have to leave their homes and go to the bank and draw cash and things like that. So there's quite a number of ways in which he can be really creative to make sure that his reputation stays intact. If we look at workforce, definitely employee development is key. Doing a bit of employee analysis to see, somebody might be in there that has the necessary skills, graphic skills, design skills, to really help them to use the workforce that he has and redeploy them and keep them going. Service, staying connected with customers. This is probably going to be the most difficult thing, because he is going into a market where if he doesn't have, or if he didn't have an online presence before, he's now competing to people who are seasoned in this. So to crack that market might be very, very difficult. And he might have to do this through maybe community involvements in projects, engaging with online influencers, brand building and social media. So these things could be completely out of their frame of reference, but again, it's nothing that can't be taught or learned as they grow along. All right, they can also, we spoke earlier of the influences that keep attacking our strategy and our ability to execute our strategy. So while they can be mindful of, moving forward, they can use systems to also flag alerts or alert them if there's anything that is an imminent threat. So here we can look at things like, again, in the different sectors when it comes to people, any infection rates or employees that are not doing mentally so well in this time of social disconnect. So they can have certain alerts that will alert them of this, as long as and with this also then the process is to make sure that they check in regularly with their staff. Other alerts that could be built in that affects their supply chain. Could be, if suppliers are struggling, if there's movement restrictions that come into place again, customer needs that might change, price sensitivity, they have to watch out for that. And again, also what's their competition doing. They need to ensure that their cash is stable. This becomes a daily priority. They need to keep an eye on that. If there are loans or investment opportunities that they are looking out for, they need to make sure they have alerts so that if anything opens up in that space that could aid their cash flow, they can take advantage of that. And then the last one is technology. With technology comes a massive risk or increase in risk in cyber attacks. So if they're going to do online selling or online retailing, they need to make sure that privacy is, always a top priority. They need to watch out for online fraud. So all these things, they need to be able to build in alerts into their systems to make sure that their strategy and how they're doing it is protected and their purpose can still be fulfilled through the way in which they do it. So if we design these things and we implement them properly, the systems won't just add value in a time of crisis, but they'll enable the business to grow in the long term. I think it's just a massive hump to overcome in the beginning to change the way that we think about strategy. So when we look at this, we need to identify what to collect. We spoke earlier on of organizations collecting so much useless information. So we need to get very clear in terms of what it is that we need to collect, how we want to collect it. Is it interviews, questionnaires, surveys? How are we doing it? We need to be able to collate and store it and then analyze it to help us to make decisions in the right way. We need to make sure it's real time as well, accurate, it needs to be kept confidentially. All of those things come into play when we look at data. And then when we look at the systems, they need to be able to flag us for any unusual changes in the data. Again, where strategy used to be something we revisit long term, this should now be boardroom discussions happening on a monthly basis, if not weekly basis. We need to put in place systems to ensure the information flow is maintained, communication lines are established, and our analytical skills need to be top notch. So on the slide, on the systems and processes one, you'll see there's areas marked in red. That's typically where our leaders need to be upskilled. They need to know how to make decisions. They need to be very well versed in problem solving, in scenario analysis, and communication is absolutely key. They need to be comfortable in this uncertain environment. So then we go to the last element. Now that we've looked at data, systems and processes, we shift our focus to trust. So if Local Yocal is to succeed, they need to build trust. They need to ensure that accountability is communicated. Everybody needs to be on board. Survival is up to every person and all must play a role in the fulfillment of this new strategy. They need to ensure that staff and communities are committed to buying into their why. And this is critical. If people understand our why and they believe what we believe, we can rebuild communities and economies. By engaging in open conversation. I know it's difficult, it's not the easiest thing to do, but we need to have these conversations with staff, customers, suppliers, banks, regulators, and by remaining true to our purpose, we can build resilient businesses not only to survive the current pandemic, but to build something that will sustain the fluctuating space that we're in, to kind of like move through this uncertainty. And we'll have to focus on relationships and honesty. By enabling our leaders to get comfortable with this uncertainty, they can then foster stronger bonds. Our purpose, as I mentioned, it hardly changes. It's the reason why we do what we do, and that's not going to change. In the current environment, how we do it needs to be flexible, adaptable, and transparent. We don't have the answers. Nobody has the answers, but we don't need to have all the answers. We need to stay true to what we believe so we can create strong connections, especially in these times. We need to foster relationship to build loyalty and community, and that in turn will then secure our resilience. So with that, I've taken you through strategy and leadership by looking at each of the foundations. Next week, we'll unpack business development. So business development, we're going to look specifically at clients and suppliers, or customers and suppliers, moving into different markets. And then in the last session, we're going to look at operations. So, you know, in terms of legal and regulatory, risk, IT, and things like that. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to move here to my, my Q&A. Londiwe, I'm not sure, do we have any questions from our audience? We've got quite a bit of time for Q&A, so if anybody has a comment or a question, please feel free to ask it now, and then we can have a look at those. Okay. All right. I should also just note at this point in time, there's going to be a survey, a link to a survey that you'll receive. If you can please just fill in the satisfaction survey, and then a recording of this will also be on our website. So you will find all of that over there. All right. Okay, I see Londia's put the survey on there. Thank you very much for that. Any questions? No questions. Wow, I'm lucky today. Okay. I see we don't have any questions coming through. If you do later on, if you want to drop an email or send me a WhatsApp, more than willing to answer your questions. In BDO, we are developing surveys around testing all of these things. We'll launch that fairly quickly as well to help organizations to establish then, you know, where they've been impacted, how they can change their strategy moving forward. Okay. Londiwe, questions? Here we go. I've got one. Please give more information on systems that can enable quick decision making. Oh, I've lost that question now. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Please give more information on systems that can enable quick decisions in terms of strategy. That's a very good question. So if we look at decision-making processes, there are quite a number of them that are that facilitates structured decision-making. You can take something like there's the 6 hats theory, where if I put a problem statement out there, one person has to only give negative comments, one only gives positive comments, one gives crazy comments. So there's quite a lot of, if I talk systems, it's not necessarily technology related. It's decision-making processes and decision-making systems that are out here. So that's, for example, one. If we look at strategy specifically, the Porter's 5 forces. So Porter's 5 forces helps us to look at our competitive environment in 5 specific elements. So that way, instead of trying to figure out what should I look at when I look at my competitors, it's a very nice framework that sets out all the different things that need to be considered when I look at my competitive environment. I hope that helps. So yeah, maybe I should be clear, their system's not always technologically driven. Sometimes it helps to have facilitated discussions using these models around them. Okay, I've got no more questions. Anybody else with a question? Feel free to drop me an email if you don't want to ask the question at this point in time. You're more than welcome to do so. And again, thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Okay. Okay. Londi, are we good? Do we keep them going?
We don't seem to have any further questions, Nadine, so I think at this point we can close, and then
Fantastic.
Should we have anyone that will be interested in getting in contact with you, I think they've got your details on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to my ladies in the background. I really appreciate the fact that I don't have to do this alone. Thank you so much for everybody that tuned in today. And yeah, please feel free to contact me if you need additional information. As I said, we are currently dividing or devising the tools behind this to enable businesses to move through this quite swiftly. Good luck where you are in facing the challenges. If you're in South Africa, we're facing load shedding now on top of everything else. So please keep safe, keep warm, and hopefully I'll see you again next week. Thank you very much.